According to Bloomberg, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain says President Biden is expected to announce his re-election campaign after the holidays. This comes as Biden's push to make South Carolina the first in the nation Democratic presidential primary has stirred up old tensions between his and Senator Bernie Sanders' camp. In 2020, Biden lost the first two primaries in Iowa, New Hampshire, then he also lost Nevada, but won decidedly in South Carolina, solidifying his presidential primary success.
Former Sanders campaign manager Faz Shakir criticized the choice to nominate South Carolina in a New York Times op-ed due to the state's anti-union stance and the fact that it is decidedly not a battleground state, causing DNC Chair Jamie Harrison to accuse the Sanders alum of dismissing the importance of black voters in the primary, a familiar tune. But as Jacobin writer Branko Marcetic noted, in 2020, South Carolina ranked dead last in terms of how much its demographics had changed, growing older and whiter, in fact. Georgia has a higher proportion of African Americans, while Nevada is far closer than both states to mirroring the actual demographic makeup of the country as a whole. Critics of the South Carolina push have gone so far as to call the move undemocratic and an obvious ploy to lock in Biden's renomination bid. Yeah, so it's worth noting, Biden didn't just lose those first three states. He did disastrously in them. I think coming in fifth place in some of them, I don't think higher than third place in any of those states. Nevada, which very notably has a very high Latino population and is more reflective of the population of the nation as a whole. Bernie Sanders won in a way that caused the entire country to melt down. That's when we had all of these news commentators on MSNBC talking about how there were going to be executions in Central Park and brown shirts marching in the street, and we have to stop Bernie Sanders. People were very openly concerned about what this meant. And so to act like this isn't a kind of partisanship that's happening here and that race isn't being used as a cover to excuse what Joe Biden is doing here, this is about him having long ties with the establishment in the state of South Carolina, a conservative state, a very poor state that frankly Democrats haven't done very much to support ever. And people like Jim Clyburn, who has a lot of power in the state and close ties to Joe Biden, being able to basically swing the election and lock it up for Joe Biden. That's what this is about. This isn't about trying to get, more black voters heard. We've seen exactly how little Joe Biden cares about the interests of black voters over the course of the last 2 years when he has fulfilled zero of the promises that he's made to them, from canceling student debt of people who went to HBCUs to passing a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. None of it has happened. And this does seem to be little more than an effort for Joe Biden to box out any primary challenges.
Yeah, I don't think he's likely to face a very serious primary challenge, but you're right that this would benefit him. But what is you educate me, I don't, you know so much more about this specific subject than I do. How would this play to Kamala Harris coronation in 2028? Is this designed to ultimately help her?
Well, I think there is an expectation that whatever Jim Clyburn says, people in the state will do. And there is some truth to that. I forget the exact number now, but I believe it was a significant majority, maybe 60% of voters said that Jim Clyburn's endorsement basically dictated how they were going to vote in the Democratic primary. So to that end, it could be the case that if he says Kamala is the one, that people will fall in line and Kamala will be the one. It is worth noting, though, however, that in a general election context, this is not a competitive state for Democrats. The fact of a Democrat being popular or being able to win in South Carolina means absolutely nothing for their ability to actually win the country as a whole, and is a kind of waste of energy in a lot of ways. I think it makes a lot more sense to focus on a purple state like Georgia or like Nevada to try to see if the person that you've picked actually is going to be able to stick the distance.
Yeah.
And what we know about Kamala Harris is that she was someone who did so poorly in these races and was so unpopular that she had to drop out of the primary before her home state because Andrew Yang, of all people, someone who had zero name recognition a year before the primary or going into the primary, was beating her in the polls in California.
Yeah, if we wanted to have primaries in states where they matter for the national stakes and you want to choose candidates based on how they resonate in the states you need to win, then we're looking at Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania,
Michigan,
the exact
Ohio.
the exact ones that were in the mix for some of these Senate races in this midterm. So I do think I understand not wanting Iowa in particular and New Hampshire, I guess, to a lesser extent,
because
but
of
still
the caucus reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that was so dysfunctional. I remember the not knowing who won. It looked utterly ridiculous.
Sure.
The optics of it, and also it's a very bizarre process. It's not one that I think makes a lot of sense to the casual voter or casual participant in democracy.
Sure.
Iowa's had a lock on it for forever. Not a representative state on any front, and yes, it incompetently performed. So I understand not wanting to, removing it from some other state. I think that's fine. I think that's a decision you can come to without having any really partisan agenda for it. Republicans should do the same. But yeah, I take your point about the South Carolina pivot is just such a pro-Biden and theoretically pro-Kamala Harris move.
One other thing that is worth noting about Iowa is that I think the concerns about the lack of diversity, et cetera, are valid, and the fact that the caucus process does benefit certain kind of candidates and not others. But having a smaller state where you can do more retail politics, where there is a bigger effect of just investing money, door knocking, talking to people, and getting your name out there, it does benefit smaller names, people with less money, and the kind of people that I think we do want to be running for office more. If you had to take on a behemoth like California or New York, or even a significantly larger state like South Carolina, it's very, very difficult to gain any entry there if you're not already someone with billions of dollars who's backed by the political machine. And that is something that a struggle that Bernie Sanders faced. He also has to take some responsibility for not doing more grassroots work in that state for a longer period of time and doing more of the political glad handing that is required to make inroads in the community in that state and a lot of southern states in particular. So that's on Bernie Sanders, and he has to own that and those kinds of choices. But other kinds of insurgent candidates are also going to face those challenges. And as we're discussing who should vote first, we should keep in mind that there are going to be a kind of establishment versus anti-establishment concerns here that we definitely should be paying attention to.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for shedding some light on that for all of us. We'll have more Rising right after this.